Thank you all so much. Aaron, it's great to hear from you again. Really appreciate being brought back here to chat with you all. I remember sitting in your seats a few years ago doing the MRDA and um, learning a ton of stuff, but also hoping that the lecturers would not go on too long and talk about stuff that was completely unrelated to what I was doing. So I'll try to give every thought that I give will try to be through the lens of how it may be able to help you as well. So without further ado, let me just start talking about myself. Um, Here we go. So, boy, this is a very valuable quote to have in mind whenever you're thinking about doing anything in research. It's attributed to Winston Churchill, and it is, "Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm." Um, that is just so unbelievably relevant to research because sometimes it seems like all you do is submit grant application after grant application. They just keep getting rejected. But it's only when you just give up and stop and just completely abandon it, it's really when there's any actual failure going on. Because every time you do something, even if it doesn't get funded, you're learning from it, and I guarantee it makes your next approach better. Um, so just try to keep that in mind. So just quickly about me, and again, this will come back to you and hopefully be relevant to you. But my early background really didn't start anything to do with research. Immediately after residency, I did a cardiovascular emergencies fellowship at University of Virginia. And then because of that fellowship, I originally thought I was just going to learn all about content in acute coronary syndrome and EKG education and training. But what I really got out of that was an appreciation for systems of care improvement. And so immediately after completing that fellowship, I got asked to come to MUSC to become the Chest Pain Center medical director, where I would use that skill of clinical pathway development and systems of care improvement to be used and implemented here at MUSC. And then I also did another administrative activity called informatics, which initially I never thought it would play a role in my current career, but you'll see how the dots sort of weirdly connect. So when I first started here and throughout the entirety of my young adult life and into my early attendingship life, I never thought I would do research. If you asked me if I was going to be interested in research, I would have been like, yeah, I'm all set. Thanks so much. Why don't you ask this guy next door? I just wasn't interested in it. I didn't have any of the research skills necessary to be good at it, and it didn't interest me as at a conceptual level. So what I was really interested in, though, when I was a chest pain center medical director, was developing these clinical pathways. And so this is just one example of a clinical pathway that I developed when I first came to MUSC. And it took a couple of years to develop, but eventually we refined it and thought we had a pretty good product. So what I was really interested in, what really hadn't been done before, was how do we assess moderate risk chest pain? We know what to do with low risk chest pain. We know what to do with these patients, and we know what to do with high risk patients. But this moderate risk group was really obscure. And so because we had this unique tool at MUSC that was really infrequently deployed across the US, which was coronary CT angiography, we had this really highly sensitive tool to detect ACS, acute coronary syndrome. And so we leveraged that tool for this moderate risk patient group and started using that as part of our pathway. But it just wasn't being used. It's not, like I mentioned, it's not being used widely across the United States. So we developed this novel pathway, and then using just a PDF file isn't really helpful for most people. So I thought it would be cool if we could integrate that pathway into the electronic health record as a smart tool. So what providers would do is they would click through all the different parts of the clinical decision rule to determine the patient's risk level for acute coronary syndrome. And as you answer each of these questions, it gives you a final score of a clinical decision rule score. This, we call it the hard score. And based on that, it gives you the next steps for what to do. It was also pretty cool because it gave you that, it automatically populated that decision rule into the chart. So like if you diagnose the patient as having a moderate risk heart school, it would auto-populate that in the chart. So again, had nothing to do with research. I was just really interested in doing some sort of quality improvement initiative. But what we found was that when people use this algorithm, when they actually use this smart form, it resulted in a 75 to 78% discharge rate, which is 25% fewer hospitalizations than what was described in the literature. So it was like wow, that's really good. That's significantly better than what's out there in chest pain. Um, but we also recognized as we measured how often it was being used, it was only being used in 20% of eligible cases. So when patients came over with chest pain, they were only using this tool in 1 out of 5 settings. So this led to this sort of kind of epiphany to me that clinical decision tools, although they can be really effective to improve um, clinical outcomes and reduce costs. They really are not being leveraged to the extent that they should be. And so, for me at least, why weren't we using this tool as much as we should be using it? And my initial hypothesis is because it's clunky. You have to click through all these boxes. You have to go to a separate place in the electronic health record. And providers don't want to do that. They don't want to use some tool that's interruptive to their workflow. So this became a jumping off point for me where the idea is how can we develop a tool that helps providers make decisions that does not impede their clinical workflows? How can we automate these processes? And so that became the stepping stone or the initial point for the entirety of the rest of my career up to this point. So with that in mind, I realized that I really did have sort of a weird kind of a backdoor into this research interest. And so I think I did it in 2018. Um, and so I did that and I thought, okay, I'm all set to go, ready to do some research. And I submitted 2 research projects later that year, and they were both just flat out rejected. That was a real bummer for me. But then it also was a realization that although the MRDA was really helpful in honing in some of my early research skills, I really needed to refine those research skills to be more marketable and to be more competitive in the NIH landscape. So that's what really made me pursue a Master of Science in Clinical Research. And that was it took a year and a half to do. And from that point, I thought, okay, now I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to resubmit. I have all the skills I need to do NIH research. And then just the pandemic hit and my interests were starting to morph a little bit. And I had this crazy opportunity to partner with industry to develop an automated clinical decision support using an artificial intelligence machine. And so it became clear to me that if I really want to make a bigger impact, getting hammered down in NIH and the many years it's going to take to get through um, doing that type of research over a really long period is just not going to be as impactful potentially as partnering with industry who can help me develop the tools that I need much, much more quickly. And so my path kind of became a little bit askew in 2020, 2021. And so this is just an interesting sidebar that's kind of changed my trajectory a bit. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to go back to NIH research at some point. It just means for the time being, it's another interesting opportunity to explore. So, so what am I doing right now? Well, right now I've partnered with this startup company called QuiMD, and we're trying to deploy an artificial intelligence machine directly into the electronic health record as a plugin. And so that's this part right here, what's in this red box. And we're trying to show that interacting with a provider in a way that does not show as a big annoying pop-up, and showing that taking all this data that's available in the chart and bringing it forth to the provider so that they can see all that important information up front, and then giving, based on that information, the artificial intelligent machine gives a differential diagnosis for what the provider needs to at least be thinking about as our top, 1, 2, 3, 4 differential diagnosis. And then from there, the provider can order specific tests based on what the artificial intelligence machine suggests. And so that's kind of the idea behind what we're trying to do. We've been working together for about 2 years now. We expect to integrate this is just a mock-up. We expect this to start the integration process in January of this year. And we're going to work as an iterative team to kind of make it better, make it more accessible to providers, work with the team to make it more visible and make it more easy to use and just more visually pleasing so that providers are more likely to use it. And that's going to be like a 6-month process. And then we're going to have a final tool deployed starting in probably around July of next year. And Once we do that, we're then going to assess how accurate is it, how usable is it to providers? Do end users actually use it? Do they think that it's visibly pleasing and that it's something they're actually excited to use? And then how well does it actually accomplish the goals we set out for it to do? Like, does it reduce length of stay? Does it reduce hospitalizations? And can providers arrive at the final diagnosis more quickly by using this tool? So those are all the things that we're going to be doing in the next couple of months. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do in a nutshell for the next 2 years or so. And then from there, depending on how that looks, I'm probably going to start going back to NIH funding and starting to leverage my artificial intelligence experience to kind of get a broader multi-center grant for deploying it in multiple hospitals throughout the state and possibly throughout the country. So that's just me. That's my journey up to this point. And so you're probably thinking, okay, thanks for telling me all about you and that little like self-aggrandizing experience, but how does this apply to me? And so I think of some of the messages, some of the take-home lessons that I learned these past few years that have been really, really important that I think can really apply to everybody who's interested in research is this job and this career path can be really time consuming and it can really be stressful. And so one of the analogies that I heard kind of midway through my Master of Science in Clinical Research career was this idea that in your life, you have so many different things that you need to juggle. You need to juggle your academic career, your clinical career, your family, your physical wellness, your mental wellness, whatever, spiritual wellness you may want to be balancing as well. Like all of those things are different balls that you need to be juggling in the air. And you cannot possibly juggle all of those balls. It's just not possible to do all of it effectively. So one of the most important things you can do as an early researcher is identify what are the most important things in your life and identify those as your glass balls. Then you have all these other things in your life that are, think of them as your rubber balls or your plastic balls, things that you can drop occasionally, and it's okay if they drop. But your glass balls, you cannot let them drop because if they drop, they shatter and you cannot repair them. So you need to identify what are your glass balls and what are your rubber balls. And so for me, it became clear to me during my master's program, I was spending nights and weekends constantly working on my research projects, working on my clinical projects. I was still maintaining my informatics medical directorship, which was just not sustainable. And I recognized that I needed to identify what my glass balls were much better than I had been doing. And so I just came to this decision in my life. I was missing too much of my children's activities on the weekends, and at nighttime I wasn't spending enough time with my wife. I was always in this office, like working on my next lecture, and it just wasn't a really healthy thing for me. And so I just restructured my values, and it said, these are my family's my glass balls. Nights and weekends are for my family. Unless I'm working clinically, that's just what I'm going to be doing, and anything else is just going to have to take a step back. I can't tell you how helpful that has been in my research career to just give me a better mental wellness and to help me prioritize what's most important. So I strongly encourage you to identify what your glass balls are and what your rubber balls are. So the next big concept that is really important to achieving success in research is strategizing your success. Everyone has this idea that your success path is like a straight line, and you want to minimize any deviations from it. But life is just such a messy thing. You're going to have different personal things that happen in your life that set you back. You're going to have different projects that you get put on either by choice or because you're being volunteered to do it by your supervisor, and you're just going to have to do it. And so your path to success is going to take longer than you hope it will. It almost always does in almost every case. But there are things that you can do to minimize the deviations from that path to success. And the first is you want to choose a project that does two things simultaneously. It has to excite you, and it has to advance. You have to recognize that it's something that advances your career to get you to that endpoint. If it doesn't do both, you really need to think long and hard about whether or not it's a project or an endeavor that you want to take on. So I have a huge interest in pulmonary embolism risk stratification. And so I've gotten asked to do a lot of different things in relation to pulmonary embolism. But I've had to say no to doing projects on that because it deviates from my main goal of pursuing the improvement of cardiac risk stratification to assess for acute coronary syndrome. And so even though PE excites me, it doesn't help me advance my career with acute coronary syndrome. And so I've had to offer those positions, offer those opportunities to other people. And I strongly encourage you to do the same, because if it doesn't do both, it's going to dramatically delay your path to get to where you want to go. The other thing that you need to learn to do that I highly recommend you develop the skill for is learning to say no without saying no. Obviously, when you first start off in your research, or when you first start off as an attending in medicine or whatever job you have in medicine, you're going to be expected to say yes a lot of the time. Your supervisor's going to be like, hey, I hired you for this, I need you to do it. And oftentimes you're just going to have to say yes. But as soon as you recognize that you have the power to say no, you really want to deviate from things that are going to, or you're really going to want to say no to things that are not helping you get to that success point you want to get to. And so always say, thanks for thinking of me whenever somebody offers you a job, but learn strategies for saying no. So if it's something that may actually help you, but you just don't have the time for it right now, say, hey, let me check with my schedule and get back to you in a couple of days. Thanks for thinking of me. Let me get back to you. But if it's something you know that you just don't want to do, just be upfront with it. Just don't say no outright. Say, thanks for thinking of me. I don't have the bandwidth right now based on all of the projects that I have, but suggest someone else who might be a good fit. That way you're not leaving your supervisor in a bind. Or you could compromise and say, hey, I can't do this thing right now, but there's this other thing that I could do that I think would also help our department. Again, provided that it helps advance your career and is something that you're interested in doing. So those are some tools that I find are really, really helpful to help you get to that endpoint that you want to get to. And then the last thing that applies to everybody is it can be really demeaning. It can be really demeaning when you think man, I've done all these different things and it doesn't seem to be helpful for my ultimate goals. But just thinking about my own goals, which is maximizing the impact in cardiovascular emergency care, I never thought that being a high school teacher, which I was a high school teacher before I got into medicine, I never thought that the skills I learned as a communicator would be helping me create presentations that help me with my research, that help me with in my department to advance the different QI projects that I have. And yet they have. I also never thought that my fellowship would be something that would be used for quality improvement in my department, and yet it has. And then I never thought that my research would be something that I would be partnering with industry to do, and yet I have been partnering with the industry. And all of these different things that could have easily have been dead ends in my career, I've leveraged them to help me get to this endpoint of improving cardiovascular care. So just try to be open-minded and recognize that there are no real dead ends. You can always leverage your historical failures to help make your current situation more successful. So that's all I have for you. I hope that's relevant to you, and I hope that does help provide some insight. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, either about my specific research that I've done up to this point or any other strategies for success moving forward.